late August 1963, near the town of Sagrada Familia, Brazil, 3 boys went into the garden and started to draw water from the well. Suddenly, they became aware of a hovering sphere above the trees. They could see 4 or 5 rows of people inside the sphere. An opening under the sphere became visible, and 2 light rays shot downward. A slender, 10-foot-tall being came down as if gliding on the 2 beams of light. He alighted in the garden and walked for 20 feet or so in an odd fashion. His back seemed stiff. His legs were open, and his arms outstretched. He swung his body from left to right, as if trying to find his balance, and then sat down on a rock. The 3 boys observed that the giant wore a transparent helmet and had in the middle of his forehead what they described as a dark eye. He wore tall boots, each of which was equipped with a strange, triangular spike, which made a peculiar impression in the soft ground and could be seen for several days afterward. His garment was shiny and had inflated as soon as the entity had touched the ground. The trousers seemed to be fastened tightly to the boots. He had a peculiar square pack on his chest, which emitted flashes of light in an intermittent manner. Inside the sphere, still hanging motionless above the garden, the 3 boys could see occupants behind control panels, turning knobs and flicking switches. When the giant in the garden made a motion as if to grab one of the boys, Fernando picked up a stone, only to find himself unable to do anything with it, as the spaceman looked straight into his eyes. The giant then returned to the sphere, still using the light beams as an elevator, but holding his arms close to his body this time. The boys were no longer afraid, although they could not account for their new feelings. As the sphere left, they were sure the giant spaceman had not come to hurt them. And somehow, in the same irrational fashion, they knew he would come back again.
Hey, all you friends and aliens, welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, a podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Man, I'm psyched to be back in UFO and alien territory.
Yeah, no, man. With what the audience doesn't know is I've been kind of begging to get back in. And not that you don't want to do it. I mean,
I love it.
You obviously want to talk about UFOs too, but we've had a lot of other stuff that we wanted to cover. But I just feel like with all this like recent, I'll say attention and increased sort of like U.S. government acknowledgement that at the very least there have been confirmed sightings of UFOs by our military. Air traffic control, commercial pilots, whatever. Now, I gotta say, of course, just because something is an unidentified flying object doesn't necessarily mean that it's extraterrestrial or, anything like that. It just means like, hey, there's something flying here. We don't know where it's from, who's controlling it. When I say who, obviously, again, I don't just mean aliens. I mean, potentially other governments.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever. But dude, I got to be honest with you, man. I'm not sure what's more terrifying. Yeah. Option 1, this is human technology, and it's not ours.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And they can do all these like crazy physics-defying flight patterns and all this kind of stuff. Or option 2, it's alien technology, right? I'm not sure what's worse, you know?
Which by the way, if we're being politically correct, which I feel like there's a motive behind this, but they're no longer called UFOs. They're now called UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena. And
well, maybe that's to like sort of divide and categorize, because now there's also unidentified aquatic phenomenon that's happening.
Oh,
too.
I thought that was I thought that was what is it? Underwater submerged USO.
Maybe there's all kinds of like whatever. The thing is, in the story that y'all just heard, y'all. I said y'all.
No.
First time. This is a first episode ever where we like really got Southern.
I was gonna say I'm the one who typically sounds like a redneck, and now you just said y'all, which
I just
like.
feel it's one of those things where I just feel like you all sounds so stupid.
Yeah, me too.
Right? I apologize to anybody that uses that, but y'all is what you're supposed to say. Okay. So here's something that I'd always heard, and no matter how sort of deep into UFO stuff someone is, you're going to hear quite often that in South America is like a dang hotspot.
It really is.
Right? And specifically this area, this Sagrada Familia in Brazil, it is included in this area called Rio Grande do Sul, I think is how you pronounce it. Again, it's Portuguese.
Yeah.
I don't speak Portuguese.
Shout out to Raphael Grandpa, who's not going to like all these
mispronunciations.
Yeah.
My apologies. But this area in particular has so many events that I think are pretty substantial that now, having started this sort of around the world UFO abductions stuff, man, we're going to have to come back and visit a lot more because there's just crazy stuff that I found that I don't even want to get into because we got to save it for another time.
I mean, dude, hold on. I just had an idea, and this is not like a pre-planned thing, but what if we do like the summer of abductions, and like once a month we have an episode where we travel around the world and talk about abductions.
I love it.
Okay, let's do it.
Done. Hopefully this idea lives on a lot better than our fantasy face-off idea.
Yeah.
Which just basically, we just let kind of nosedive into oblivion. But anyhow, okay, let's talk about these kids. So there's a couple things in this story that just completely fascinated me. First off, and I hate to do it because I often compare anything to this guy, but there is something very reminiscent of Sam the Sandown Ghost Clown in this one to me.
It's exactly, well, actually, I think there's several sort of Sam situations on a few of these stories.
Right.
And
I mean,
it's kind of crazy.
Whenever I'm thinking about it, it's like these kids describing this well, just, alien, I guess, or being coming down. Well, first let's talk about the fact that this craft has like 4 or 5 rows of people in it. And then the door opens. I thought it was really cool that the beam of light is some sort of like transportation mechanism, which is really neat to me.
Yeah,
and
like the 2 beams, and he just sort of like glided down.
Yeah,
the
exactly.
beams. It's really cool.
And then the creature itself has this like weird sort of like stiff back walk, like, that's what reminded me of Sam the Sandown Ghost Clown.
Yep.
And like how it was like trying to get its balance, and then it just like sits down.
Well, and it was like waving its like arms right to left as it was like walking.
Yeah.
I didn't totally understand that, but
yeah, it kind of reminded, like, I pictured in my head like Sam the Sandown Ghost Clown, of course, but also like baby Bambi, like a baby deer that's just like, whoa, gosh, I've got these legs, I don't know how to use them yet. That's kind of what it reminded me of. And then, I thought it was so cool because they described this like suit that it's wearing, these like crazy boots that make like distinct impressions into the mud that they could like see for days after that. Yeah. And
which before we move on from that, like, so what does that mean? Does that mean it didn't have actual feet? It was just sort of like spikes, or does that mean it had
some sort of
high
like
heels?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess apparently what these guys are saying is this thing was just fashion forward, man.
Very fashion forward.
I mean, high heels I didn't even, oh, that's hilarious. I didn't even think of that. So this alien wears high heels.
Cool.
He's like, maybe that's what made him like look 10 feet tall.
Actually.
And then like this, the way they describe the helmet too, with like almost like a dark eye in the forehead.
Yeah, well, it said something about like a transparent helmet, but then like a black eye in the center. So does that mean like it has regular sort of more sort of humanoid type
Yeah, I don't
eyes.
know. That's one thing that was
don't
kind of
know.
missing from the description that I really wanted was
Me
like,
too.
what was underneath? If it's transparent, then like, what's under there? You know?
Yeah, I didn't understand that.
And
Which
then, like-
maybe it was like more of like a light kind of.
Yeah, I
kinda
mean,
thing. 'Cause there-
if you
there
go
did
back
seem
to
to be a lot of light
1963 and you have like a, just a regular camping headlamp on your head,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not saying that this could be time travelers, but whatever. But here's another thing: when it talks about the square pack on its chest, it's
Darth
like
Vader.
light. Come on, man! You stole it from me.
Yes, I knew it. I knew it.
I was gonna say, holy crap, man! This is Darth Vader.
Yep, exactly. Mm-hmm.
I mean, dude, just keeping with the Darth Vader theme, the kid picks up a rock, he's gonna throw it, and then this thing uses the Force on him. He can't.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I did like, one thing about it, again, going into the summer of abductions and things like that. Well, the thing that I always kind of get sort of freaked out about when kind of thinking about aliens is the fact that, like, you don't really, I'm not a big fan of like not having control over things, right? It's like, if I'm in a scenario, it's like, okay, well, I'll just fight my way out. But when you got these aliens that can freeze you with a beam of light, or
Can't do
like, there's nothing that you can do. You're just
No.
powerless, I mean, it reminds me of like Fire in the Sky and all these kind of things. So I like the way toward the end of this that these kids had this overwhelming feeling that, look, these things are not here to harm us.
Well, but they said they couldn't understand why they felt like that. Yeah, it said it was like suddenly
True. Yeah,
we
true.
weren't fearful, but we couldn't understand why, basically.
And we knew that they would be back.
And we knew that
Yowzer.
they would come back. Which to me, that felt like which I don't even think it was in the Sandown Clown, but like something about that even sort of felt, which did it ever really sort of describe how it disappeared, how it sort of stopped?
What do you
like,
mean?
you know what I mean? Like, maybe I missed it, but
What do you mean, like the craft or what?
yeah, like they saw the craft, they saw the dude sort of, or the entity sort of glide down. But did it go really into like why, or like how it left?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of used the light beams as an elevator and went back up. And then, no, it didn't really say. Super fascinating.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. One thing that, did you happen to, whenever you first read about the chest pack, did you try to like go back and like be like, okay, now this is the Darth Vader helmet. This is,
I don't know what you mean by
I
that
tried
question.
to like once you read about like the little chest pack with like all the lights, did you then be like, okay, that sounds like Darth Vader, and then go back in the story and sort of try piecing together like, well, this helmet could look like Darth Vader's helmet.
Yeah, no. No, not quite.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I like that one a lot.
So everybody put a pin in the map near Rio Grande do Sul because we are going to come back to this area on another episode.
Onward.
This incident took place on May 20th, 1950, in France at about 4 p.m. near the Loire River. An official investigation by French local police has substantiated the physical traces mentioned in this report, which can be translated thus. I was hurrying back home to prepare dinner. I was happy and content, and I was singing some popular tune. Everything was calm and still, without any breeze or wind. I was alone on the path. Suddenly, I found myself within a brilliant, blinding light, and I saw two huge black hands appear in front of me. Each one had 5 fingers of a black color with a yellowish tint, somewhat like copper. The fingers were roughly formed, slightly vibrating or quivering. These hands did not come from behind me, but from above. As if they had been hanging over my head, awaiting the proper time to catch me. The black hands did not immediately apply themselves to my head. I probably took 2 or 3 steps before they touched me. The hands had no visible arms. The 2 black hands were applied to my face with violence and squeezed my head as a bird of prey rushes on its unfortunate, helpless victim. They pulled my head back against a very hard chest, one that seemed to be made of iron. I felt the cold through my hair and behind my neck, but no contact with clothes. The hands were squeezing my head like a formidable vice, not abruptly, but gradually. They were very cold, and their touch made me think that they were not made of flesh. The big fingers were placed on my eyes, and I could not see anymore, on my nose so that I could not breathe, and also on my mouth to prevent me from crying out. When I was surrounded by the strong, blinding light, I had the feeling I had been paralyzed, and when the hands touched me, I had the very distinct impression of a strong electric discharge, as if I had been shaken by a lightning bolt. My whole body was annihilated, helpless, without reflexes. I was like a broken toy between the inhuman hands of my unknown aggressor. For a little over a minute, I felt his hands tightening very strongly on either side of my throat. It was horribly painful. Then he began to swing me forward and backward several times, still fiercely squeezing my head against his chest. I had the distinct impression that this being wore armor or a steel carapace, or some very hard and cold material. I felt his two invisible arms pressing heavily on my shoulders. It was at that moment that I heard his laugh. A strange laugh I could not explain. It was as if I heard him through some water, and yet it seemed quite close above my head. At first, it sounded rough and hushed, then rather strong and rolling. It made me shudder and hurt me. After a few seconds, the laugh stopped, suddenly cut off. Then, a knee hit me in the back, hurting me very much, as if it were made of steel. That made me think my aggressor was completely covered with this steel. This blow made me fall back, and the unknown aggressor made me lie down, still squeezing my head against his chest. Then, he dragged me along the path by my head, and he seemed in a great hurry. I did not hear him breathe. He pulled me into a bush full of brambles and nettles, still going backward at an incredible speed, holding my head. At that moment, I heard his voice above me, and it said,
"There she is. We've got her."
As if he were talking to someone else, some accomplice who had stayed inside the bush. This voice, like the laugh, seemed close by, although hushed by some obstacle. I was choking and I felt I was going to die. I thought of my family waiting for me at home, and my whole life passed before me in a few seconds. My aggressor pulled me through the bushes until we reached a small pasture, and suddenly he stopped. Why? His hands had gradually slipped down my face, and I tried to call for help, but I had no voice left but a tiny, shrill cry. After a while, I was able to sit among the brambles. I had a very hard time breathing. My bag was still in my hand with the money it contained. At last, I was able to get up in spite of my weakness, and then I heard some noise to my left inside the bushes. I thought I was going to see my aggressors and recognize their faces, but I saw nothing. I saw and heard the brambles scratching the empty space and the grass being pressed as if under the steps of some invisible being. I was terrified. Softly, I took to the path again, walking with difficulty. My legs were lacerated by the brambles and bleeding. I felt a strange sensation of nervous exhaustion, indefinable, as if I had been electrified by a strong current. In my mouth was a sickening, metallic, bitter taste. My muscles did not obey me. Over my shoulders, I felt something like a bar, and in my back, a painful heat as if I had been exposed to flames or to a burning ray. I must have walked like that for 5 or 6 minutes. At the end of the path, there was a turn, and from here, I could see houses. And then the pains decreased a little bit. Everything had lasted a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, and it seemed that I had lived in an unreal world. Abruptly, I heard a great noise. like a violent wind during a storm, a sudden displacement of warm air, or a violent whirlwind. I saw the trees bending as if under a sudden storm, and I was nearly thrown down. Almost simultaneously, there was a strong, blinding white light. I had the feeling something flew through the air very fast, but I saw nothing. Soon everything became calm again. I reached the house of the lockkeeper, and when I opened the door, they came toward me and asked what had happened, because they too had seen a light from their house. When I was able to speak at last, they told me all the fingers were still deeply marked in the flesh of my face, making large red bars. The police came and interviewed me at length. They examined me and observed the marks of large fingers on my face. They concluded there had been an abduction attempt and told me that it was very strange, mysterious even. They took me to the spot to continue their investigation there. They noted that at some places, the brambles were black and scorched. At some other places, they were only pressed and flattened. The fences in the pasture, which were made of wooden posts and barbed wire, had suffered also. Some posts were burned, others pulled out. The barbed wire had been wrenched away and broken. All right, man. So what'd you think about that one?
Okay, so I got a lot of thoughts on this one, and I'm really confused by this one, but I'm equally kind of thinking or sort of drawing parallels to like some sort of phenomenon that I know about. But I think this one may be my favorite one.
Yeah.
Also, probably the most terrifying.
Yeah, man. Like, okay. Like, young ladies don't have enough to worry about on a walk home than just freaking these dark hands appearing out of, from above, grabbing her head and like squeezing. I mean, so many of the descriptors in this story, it's just terrifying, man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fingers were like covering her eyes, covering her ears, and then covering her mouth.
Yeah, it's like, it was almost like, in my head, the first image that I thought of, reading about how the hands were like covering her face and stuff, for some reason, and I don't even know if this is visually accurate, but I immediately thought of, you know that scene in Ghostbusters when Dana's like sitting down on the chair and like the monster's hands are like kind of coming all over her?
Oh.
Oof, that,
Ooh. Wow.
Different movie.
There is no Dana, only soul.
When the monster's hands are like just kind of grabbing her from all directions, you know what I'm talking about? And they like covers her mouth. That's what I thought of, just like this. I mean, how terrifying would that be? And even just like the fact that they're like black and copper, yellowish.
Yeah, I didn't really understand that because it says it's black, which is a very sort of absolute definition in color. And then it's like black and yellowish. It's like, I don't really, was it like a light kind of thing? Maybe. Part of me thinks that a lot of this is, well, could be, if we're leaning into sort of your classic kind of ET abductions, I mean, it kind of sounds like it could be part of like sort of a screen memory thing. Maybe.
I mean, maybe.
Which, by the way, for folks that aren't into this, screen memories are when, typically you'll hear a story or an account of an abduction where, a lot of people would say, oh, well, no, I wasn't abducted, but, there was 3 hours of missing time, and I remember seeing this, huge owl in the woods, and it walked out of a clearing, and it just stared at me. Or like Whitley Strieber talks a lot about like deer and like owls. Mike Cleland is kind of the owl guy as far as that is concerned. But it's sort of like this sort of implanted memory to kind of cover up.
Like what really happened?
Yeah, them seeing like, typically it's tied in with alien grays too. And a lot of times I think originally the way that this sort of term was kind of coined is because they wouldn't really see the aliens or the entities or the grays or whatever until they were hypnotically regressed. So it was kind of like the regression kind of like, pulled that disguise off of the screen memories.
Man.
Which is pretty scary, really.
Yeah.
Pretty
scary.
sinister.
I mean,
okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, you had, pal.
I was going to say one, the one thing that just made it even scarier was the fact that, like, you know, these hands didn't seem to have any visible arms, you know?
Yeah. So here's the first thing that I thought of, and I'm probably going way too deep into the rabbit trail in this, but there is a book by a guy named Robert Guffey called Chameleon, and I mean, this is like a pretty deep cut. Like, even if you're pretty well versed into sort of paranormal and that kind of thing, it's a pretty deep cut kind of thing. But he wrote this book. He was friends with this guy who was a heroin addict named Dion, who kind of had this sort of like a drug house kind of thing, you know, like a drug den, if you will. And one night, and this guy that was like a Marine at Camp Pendleton was over there, and he like pulled out of his bag, he had stolen from the Army base infrared goggles, like military grade, you know, goggles. This is going much too. This is way too.
No, that's cool, man. I got it.
long.
I'm writing the notes down. Deion Sanders, and then waiting for Guffman.
Man, I haven't seen that movie in a long time. But anyway, long story short, this drug addict dude kind of gets caught up into, I think it was like the FBI or the CIA. I can't remember, but they kind of start contacting him, and because they think that he's stolen this, you know, equipment. Well, he kind of, you know, falls even deeper into this kind of thing where, you know, these agents would be like waiting outside of his house, and they were really kind of playing into like the paranoia that like a typical sort of drug addict would have. And so he kept going further and further and further, and ended up finding out that like he started seeing these sort of like, at first what he thought were like you know, typical like poltergeist sort of you know,
Entities
activity,
okay.
if you will. And he come to find out that he started seeing these where it almost looked like it was like invisible suits. It's called like, I think it was called Project Chameleon, which they called electro-optical camouflage. He started to figure all this stuff out because like sometimes it would like glitch out, you know, like if the light was on in a certain way, it would like refract or
Kind of
stuff
like how
like that.
sometimes you can see the predator.
Yeah, that's funny you said that, because that's exactly what it's tied into, which is, in this story, it's a very military-based, government type of thing. But that same, on the flip side of that, there's also this sort of paranormal entity, which is called the Glimmer Man, not to be confused with the incredible Steven Seagal movie called The Glimmer Man. But a lot, you know, like you said, a lot of people, I think it really kind of got popular in the last 10 or 15 years, but exactly like you're talking about, that like predator technology, and, you know, they just kind of see, I mean, you know what it looks like. But I really thought, you know, saying all that, coming all the way back around, I tried to like sort of tie that in with this. And so maybe like the hands were sort of like glitching out, but again, this is 1950 in France. So
I know, man.
that's the part that's like a little, I don't know, man. One thing that I thought was interesting is, like she said, that it felt like it was made of steel or it was wearing armor, but it was invisible. And classic Sam the Sandown Clown, it had this weird laugh that just like shut off abruptly.
Ugh. So scary, dude. Crazy. And then like she described multiple times just basically feeling paralyzed and like an electric current running through her, and like even the hands at the very beginning of the story when she talks about how like the fingers were kind of like moving and vibrating a little bit and stuff, and it's just like, oh gosh. And you know, there's aspects of it that like on the surface, if I was just like reading this story, and in both cases just equally terrifying, but there's an aspect of it that it's like, okay, was this just some kind of like, you know, weirdo that was trying to abduct her, like a human weirdo, that was wearing like long black gloves, and maybe they were just like nervous and like shaking whenever they were trying to hurt her. But it's just like, then they're just like dragging her by the head through like bushes and stuff. And like,
and she said for like 20 minutes or 15 minutes or something, it felt like.
Yeah, man. And then the weird, like, you know, like, we've got her, and like laughing.
Yeah,
like,
dude.
ugh.
Oh, and I'd be remiss to say that the weird laugh, she said, she sort of described as it sounded like it was underwater, which is an interesting kind of Sam the Sandown Clown kind of tie-in as well.
I mean, just that weird sort of like, almost like it, well, to me too, it made it seem like maybe since there's like armor or some sort of like suit involved, maybe it's talking through a helmet. That's what I kind of thought of whenever I thought of whenever I read that part about how it kind of sounded like it was right there, but also distant.
She did say it felt like it was like wearing armor. So, maybe it did have some sort of kind of like a helmet on or something.
Yeah.
One thing that it reminded me of also, now that you say that, is, if we're thinking of like 1950, it's one of, you and I both, one of our favorite stories where it's called the Solway Firth Spaceman. It's like a famous photo taken, and in the background you see what appears to be kind of like it looks like a 50s sci-fi like spaceman basically. And so, in that era, it kind of, I don't know, visually it kind of tied in with that a little bit. But there is something that seems very kind of like, and again, this is the sort of whole Camelio thing. When I saw that they said, "There she is, we got her," to me that sort of felt like some sort of like invisible tech, And then they went back, and there was like, the barbed wire was broken. There were like, you could see where she was dragged, or like, footprints or whatever through the area.
Well, even how her like encounter ended was fascinating to me. So it's like all of a sudden it stopped, and she even says like, "Why?" And they just like, it just like retreats into this bush. There's a bunch of like commotion, and then all of a sudden there's this bright flash, and almost like, I mean, I just imagine it as like a lightning strike in the area, which is what you're talking about, where there's this like barbed wire that's, I just said bob wire, like a freaking
new
3-year-old.
character we just came up with.
This barbed wire that's just like, messed up, and like bushes and trees bent over and all this kind of stuff. So, I always do. I mean, I'm like, man, was this lady? Because she remains like nameless. In fact, they blank out in the story, in the book where I got it. They kind of almost censor the town and the road and all this kind of stuff. So was this lady someone important in history? Was this a time traveler coming to get her, to abduct her so that she wouldn't do something good for the world or something bad to the world?
Yeah, that's definitely something. Another thing which, if you're, on the one hand, you could even tie it into like fairies and like the sort of dark side of that, where, not that any of the characteristics as far as like the armor, because, fairies hate metal or any of that, but it's like, it did say that they kind of like, when it disappeared, there was a huge sort of whirlwind, like a storm kind of thing, and then this huge bright light, and then it was calm. So you could, they say in fairy folklore, they say that like the fairies like sort of come, or they arrive on the storms, or they ride on the wind, which is pretty crazy. Or if you're looking into more, sort of real world application, maybe all this happened, and then maybe they hopped in their helicopter, or like some kind of craft even, if you're okay to go a little further into like UFOs or time travelers, huge storm, whirlwind that happened real fast, wind, storm, huge bright light, which, as it's lifting off, and then it's completely calm.
Man.
So, which to me, that's kind of what I don't know. To me, the whole like storm and then bright light, and then all of a sudden it was gone.
This one was interesting to me whenever I read it on the page, basically, because of how seemingly unique it is, right? She doesn't describe what we're typically seeing or learning or hearing about, like you said earlier, like the alien gray, or like a 3 fingers, or a skinny creature, or anything like that. It's just this like weird sort of phenomenon, these weird hands, and she never sees a body, and like she, feels it because, she says that it's hard like armor or whatever. But to me, that kind of struck me as super interesting. And it's funny that you said, maybe it was some sort of like fairy type situation or something like that, because where I did get these stories from was our favorite book, Passport to Magonia, by Jacques Vallée.
I didn't know that that's where these were from.
Yep. And it's interesting because, like he does in most chapters, he sort of like brings it all in and around, and he's presenting different accounts, not only with UFOs, but also with fairies and quote unquote heavenly beings and stuff.
Celestials.
Yeah, celestials. And I mean, there's just so many.
Which, by the way, I would say, I mean, there's been others, but I would say Jacques Vallée is, I would say he's definitely the guy who sort of brought that sort of into the public. The idea that maybe these fairy things are, or maybe these UFO sort of events, or you see a spaceman or like crafts or whatever. Maybe this is the exact same thing. We're just seeing it through a different cultural lens, or maybe it's sort of camouflaged, if you will, or what I sort of lean into, maybe it's using some sort of component in our minds. It's basically using us as like the component to see it as however we're seeing it. So like whatever our perception, whatever we think maybe like an otherworldly being should look like, maybe that sort of fills in the gaps, and that's what we see, which is... It's really bizarre and it's pretty meta, but like...
Well, I kind of want to get a little bit more into what we think about it all after we hear this next story. So, you know what I'm saying? So that we can kind of tie it all in. Mm-hmm. So for this one, let's head back to South America.
Onward!
October 12th, 1963. It was raining hard between Monte Maez and Isla Verde in Argentina. As Eugenio Douglas drove his truck loaded with coal along the road, dawn was coming. Suddenly, Douglas saw a bright spot on the road ahead, like the headlights of an approaching vehicle, except that it was a single, blinding light. To avoid collision, Douglas slowed down. The light became so intense, he had to lower his head and move to the side. He stopped the truck and got out. The light had disappeared. Through the pouring rain, Eugenio Douglas could now see a circular, metallic craft about 35 feet high. An opening became visible, making a less intense second area of light. And 3 figures appeared. They looked like men, but they were wearing strange headdresses with things like antennae attached to the headpieces. They were over 12 feet tall. There was nothing repulsive about the entities, said Douglas, but he was terribly scared. As soon as he was seen by the figures, a ray of red light flashed to the spot where he stood and burned him. Grabbing a revolver, he fired at the 3 entities and ran off toward Monte Maez. But the burning red light followed him as far as the village, where it interfered with the streetlights, turning them violet and green. Douglas could smell a pungent gas. Douglas ran to the first house and shouted for help. Ribas, the owner, had died the previous night, but his family gathered around the body, reported that at the same time they heard Douglas's call, the candles in the room and the electric lights in the house turned green, and the same strange smell was noticed. They rushed to open the door. There was Douglas, in the pouring rain, his overcoat over his head and a gun in his hand. The streetlights had changed color. It must have been one of the most fantastic scenes. Eugenio Douglas was taken to the police station where the burns on his face and hands were clearly seen. The police, it turned out, had received a number of calls about the light's color change, but they had attributed the change to irregularities in the local power plant, which, however, would hardly account for the change in the candlelights if that particular observation was not an illusion. Douglas was examined by a doctor who stated that the burns had been caused by a radiation similar to ultraviolet. According to Douglas, he had felt a burn when exposed to a red beam. When villagers went to the site where the truck was still parked, they found large footprints, nearly 20 inches long, but they were shortly afterward washed away by the rain.
Man, this is a weird one, but I love it.
After these messages, we'll be right back. America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over 200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
You're listening to That Would Be Rad.
Well, before I was rudely interrupted by that miniature cowboy, I was going to say that I love that story, and as much as I'm intrigued, I'm also kind of confused.
Yeah. I mean,
Like, what's happening here?
well, first, I thought it was kind of interesting, too, that this guy from Argentina, his last name is Douglas.
Yeah.
I never pictured that as a popular sort
Right.
of Argentinian last name, but that was a stupid kind of thing that stuck out in my mind. But
Who knows?
to me, it kind of starts off like your traditional sort of abduction story. This guy, he's on a road, he's driving his like beat up pickup truck, and all of a sudden these bright lights, are ahead of him. And I mean, just because I love sound design and stuff, whenever I read that this was all happening like like just visually thinking about this happening with the rain and like it's dark, it's nighttime. I mean, it's just like the perfect recipe for, something freaky to happen. But I mean, just right away, these three figures kind of appear. And I loved that he's described what they were wearing as a strange headdress.
Yeah, right.
Right? Because I mean, then I'm like, oh man, is this some sort of like Quetzalcoatl type?
Yeah, there you go.
Really cool looking headdress thing, that is coming down, because I don't know why, but just things like Stargate, and anytime I'm studying any sort of, and I know that's in Egypt, everybody take it easy, but anytime I'm thinking of like ancient cultures, including like in South America, like the Mayans and
The Aztec.
well, that was in Central America, but
But, I mean, but they had like the hair
that same
dress.
kind
I
of
mean,
thing.
the
It's like
headdress.
you have all these like,
Hairdress.
well, like headdresses, and all this art that is seemingly inspired by something, right?
Yeah.
And so it's a very easy, or I should say it's somewhat easy for me to just be like, oh man, boom, I buy into the ancient alien type theories and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
It's easy
So
to
that's just
do,
the
man.
first thing that I thought of whenever he used the word headdresses instead of like helmet.
Well, I did think that as well, but then it said that it had antenna. And
Yeah.
I immediately went to Ant-Man, like classic old
Yeah.
school Ant-Man.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
And like over 12 feet tall.
yeah, that's pretty interesting. To me, also, I thought the most interesting thing, and it kind of carries through the entire sort of, window or event, the idea that like these street lights changing colors. Later on, he shows up and the candles are turning green, and like what's happening with that?
Yeah. I mean, so you remember like when he's standing there in front of those beings, he doesn't really know what to do. Old Douglas pulls out that 6-gun shooter,
yeah.
and he points it at these folks, fires off some shots, and then they beam this like red beam of light that just like burns him. And I think that's why he just like runs off. He's just like terrified. He doesn't get back in the truck or anything. He just runs.
Yeah.
And then like
Oh, that makes
the
sense.
light kind of like follows him, and it's doing there's something about these beings have the ability and or technology to mess with or affect electricity,
Right.
because the street lights are changing all weird colors, and then also apparently
Like
the
color
candles,
spectrum.
the color spectrum.
Yeah. So basically, all this happens. There's a big commotion. He's freaked out. He's running. He shows up at this house where the family inside the house it was kind of like a wake, I guess. So there was kind of like an open casket, which, Argentina, 1963, probably a pretty common practice.
Yeah.
Where they have kind of a wake inside
I don't even
the
think it's
house.
open casket. I think honestly if I remember right, and it's been a while since I've had like a cultural studies class, but I do remember, especially in South America, where they actually like will have the deceased like sitting in their favorite chair,
Right.
And everybody just kind of comes around, and
It's weird.
yeah, it's very
It's weird to us.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah,
I mean, cultures are very interesting, and so anytime someone else's culture is so different, especially with regard to like life and death and stuff, it is, boy, imagine kind of being like the guy, you meet this girl at college, she says she's from Argentina, you're just smitten. Mm-hmm. She wants you to come meet her family.
I like where this is
You're
going.
excited, you've never been to the jungle.
Mm-hmm.
You get on a plane, you fly down there, and bad news. Uncle Douglas has moved, he's passed on. And you're like, oh man, that's terrible. You don't know. She doesn't think to tell you. You don't know what's about to happen. Yeah. You go into this house, knock, knock, knock. Hey, I'm so glad you're here. Nice to meet you. You walk in, and there's old Douglas.
Weekend at Bernie's style.
Weekend at Bernie's.
Classes.
I mean, what do you do, man, other than just like, ooh, nice to... Anyway, I got to take this call.
Get out the green candles.
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think it is. It's interesting that those colors changed. I like the fact that happened though, in this guy's defense, because now he's got more than one witness that something weird was going on, right? Mm-hmm. And so when he goes to the police station later and stuff, and he's got these like visible burns, to his hands and stuff and to his body, that just kind of makes for like, how could a hoaxer make something like that up, or make the color of the candles change? Right when he gets into the room.
But it's bizarre that it happened to the streetlights and the candles, which that's why I said, they were able to sort of manipulate like maybe like the color spectrum. So maybe it wasn't really like an electrical thing when the streetlights changed, because also the candles, and obviously they're not electrical. So maybe it was this sort of weird kind of, I don't know, some kind of like perception kind of thing that they were kind of altering or manipulating.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that makes the most sense,
One thing too that, since we've been kind of into this and reading a lot of these stories like the Stanford abduction, and there were several in like, from the 40s to the 60s where, and again, I cannot think of this particular case. I'll have to look it up, but it's a lot like the Stanford abduction where I believe it was like two ladies were in a car. Their grandson was in the back seat or whatever. Same kind of thing. They see this huge light up ahead. It's above them, and as soon as they kind of, as the craft goes over, over top of the car, one of the details is like the dash starts to like melt, and and they all end up, I think, with some sort of like cancer. I mean, it's a really tragic story. Yeah. The Stanford abduction is kind of the same thing. And so what I'm thinking, what I've kind of started putting together is like my theory on a lot of this stuff is, and again, it's what's considered like the nuts and bolts cases of ufology, is I think there's something in with this sort of like toxic.
Hold on, real quick. Nuts and bolts meaning actual physical craft.
Yeah, sort of like a physical craft. Like we're not talking about. Most of the time, Woody and I are always going to lean into like interdimensional or hyperdimensionals. Thanks, Jacques Vallée. But there's this sort of window of from the 40s to the 60s where they would see these nuts and bolts craft, and you think of Roswell, the crash at Roswell, New Mexico, which we're working up to. Maybe that'll be episode 100, because that's kind of a milestone story. But, it's like they would see an actual craft. Some of the details, they would see actual like rivets in the UFO itself. They would see, lights kind of going around the craft and that kind of thing. So with that, whatever those things are, whatever's happening there, I think, and when people would get close enough to these things, there would always be like some sort of toxic kind of thing. There would be a lot of times
fumes,
fumes, a pungent smell, which is on this in this case, radiation burns, worst case scenario, like cancers later on.
Right.
I think there's something in the propulsion, like whatever it is, whether it's like a radiation type thing, whether it's like sort of atomic or nuclear. Right. I think that there's something in that doesn't agree with our physiology.
Right. Man, I mean, here's the thing too. Like, earlier in the show, I talked about how whether or not it's, whether or not these UFOs that are being seen and confirmed to have been seen by us, and when I say us, I mean like, humans on Earth right now.
Yeah.
And I talked a little bit about how I don't know what's more scary, this being just like some government, whether it's ours or another government that has the technology to be able to like do all these crazy things, and then why are they doing it? Or it being aliens, right? Here's the thing that leads me to believe that, well, here's what makes it hard to believe it's humans, okay? Because these kind of sightings, these kinds of experiences and abductions or almost abductions that we talked about today have been, and like documented occurrences like this for centuries, man.
Yeah, forever.
And the thing that's very interesting about Jacques Vallée's book, again, it's called Passport Magonia. I highly recommend it.
And when did that come out?
Dude, 1968, bro.
68, yeah.
And the whole like back half of the book is almost like a bullet pointed, sort of like brief descriptions and time, date, and place of UFO phenomenon. Since,
if you like this episode, sorry to cut you off, but I haven't done that in a while.
Well,
If you like this kind of thing, then you will absolutely love this book.
oh yeah.
It's like this.
Even if you don't like this kind of thing, the brilliant thing about this book is that he approaches it in not a I'm going to prove something right or wrong.
Very unbiased.
He approaches it as, here are the documented things that have happened. Here's how they influence our culture across the globe for centuries. And it's everything from like celestial beings, even in like how they're described in biblical texts and all religious texts. And, he has this like catalog from like 1868 to 1968. So a full 100 years of these things happening, right? And the only reason it stops at 1968 is because that's when he wrote the book.
Right.
And so just imagine all the things that have happened since.
Yeah.
So when I think, oh, well, this is just human tech, well, then how does that explain, the farmer in 1868 who sees a craft
Pancakes.
come, pick up one of his cows, fly off with it, and then he finds it like 10 miles away from his farm the next day when he goes looking for it, and it's all singed and burnt and all
I
weird.
thought you were getting into the pancake one. Sorry.
No. It's wild, right?
Yeah.
And so the only way to me that it could be human technology, Marty McFly, get ready, is if it's some sort of either time travel situation or multidimensional travel. That's so drunk. Multidimensional travel, interdimensional travel, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. And who's to say, hey, you don't need a physical craft to do that, right? So, man, all in all, extremely fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. One thing also that I've been trying to get you into is that book American Cosmic by Diana Walsh Pasulka. She is actually, I think, really close with Jacques Vallée.
Oh,
so I think he's kind of somewhat involved in all that kind of, which is cool because knowing that he such a colorful life of like, all this kind of research tying it all the way up to, now the sort of modern age of this kind of thing. It's really cool.
I mean, the fact is, every single culture on the planet has experiences like this interwoven into their zeitgeist.
Yep. 100%.
Every single culture. And if you strip it away and it's like, even if you take all of the sort of extra planetary stuff away from it, right? And you get back to like, even like you, like people will say, well, I don't know about that, man. I'm a Christian. I've never heard of anything like that. Well, take away aliens and stuff like that. But you still have celestial beings. You still have somebody not of Earth, right?
Oh, yeah.
Coming down in beams of light and like angels and all kinds of other stuff. So that's included in all this when I say every single culture has aspects of interactions with other beings that are not just straight up human.
Well, dude, there's literally a class of angels, which a lot of Christians don't even realize this, but it's called the Ophanim, and they're literally these things that they're just these wheels within wheels that are just like a gyrosphere, and then they have wings like on the outside. Yep. So it's like if you saw that, you wouldn't immediately think of like, oh, that's like an angel, which, thanks to the Renaissance painters or these little chubby babies with wings. But the actual angels are like pretty terrifying as far as, the actual sort of descriptions, especially like the Ophanim, like I was saying, because in my mind, and Ezekiel's visions where it's like a wheel, I saw wheels within wheels. And like, to me, that sounds like a UFO.
Yeah, right.
So
again, man, we like, I can't wait. We got to dive in deeper. We're going to find some more of these kind of abduction stories, but also I really want to start getting into some of the stuff that Jacques Vallée goes into about fairy folk and
that's kind of our go-to.
All of the other thing, just there's so much that I really want our listeners to like hear more about, because it's so cool and it's so interesting how closely tied all of this stuff is, and just really, really makes you think like, man, that's very interesting.
Yeah. It's like, what's really going on out there? I don't know that we'll ever know, but it's fun to speculate and to look into it.
For sure, man.
Well, cool, dude. Well, I think that about wraps it up with these 3 stories. Give them their marching orders.
Yeah. So, look, we say it week after week. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our show. It means the absolute world to us. And we're so excited every single week. Not only do we feel like we're talking to, one another, obviously, but we also feel like we're talking to you. So when you're listening to this right now, I feel like I'm talking to you wherever it is that you're at, in your office, on your run or in your car, whatever it is. I feel like I get a chance to hang out with you and talk to you. And it's just an awesome, awesome thing. So Tyler, where is the best place that people can interact with us on a daily basis?
Well, we hate all internet except Instagram. And so you'll find the bulk of our activity over there. We love like the back and forth. Probably my favorite part of every week is Monday morning when the bad boy of the That Would Be Rad podcast, Clay, basically gives like a play-by-play of like where he's at in the episode, in the comment section, it's just so cool and like humbling and, all that stuff. But like what he said, we're super thankful for you guys, and we really appreciate everything you do. We appreciate the back and forth. Just building this like little community is just awesome. So also, we've said it on the last few episodes, and just keep on keeping on telling at least one friend about the show. With that, we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song on the radio. clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.